picture this scenario. You start something new with just an incredible amount of enthusiasm.
Right. We've all been there.
Yeah, exactly. You invest in the materials, you sit down in front of the blank canvas, and like within a few short weeks, you just walk away completely.
It's so common.
It really is. You convince yourself that you just don't have the talent, that your hands are too unsteady or that you simply weren't wired to create.
And it is this quiet, brutal tragedy that plays out literally every single day in the art world.
Yeah, and the profound irony of that failure is that it almost never has anything to do with your actual innate ability.
Oh, absolutely not. But we have this pervasive cultural narrative that creation is entirely mystical, right? Like it's a divine spark you either possess or you don't.
Right.
So when people encounter friction on the canvas, they immediately internalize it as, well, as a personal deficit.
And that innate talent myth is exactly what we are dismantling today.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are using the comprehensive research from GRUPO RAIIM to explore a really fascinating reality. The true culprit behind that creative frustration isn't a lack of vision.
No, not at all.
It is usually a badly assembled piece of wood and metal manufactured 10,000 kilometers away.
Which is wild to think about.
It's crazy. So our mission today is to explore the hidden physics, the fluid dynamics, and actual mechanics of what seems like the most mundane object on your desk, the paintbrush.
And I think, in a landscape that's just utterly dominated by digital shortcuts and algorithmic generation, returning to the profound anatomy of our analog tools feels it feels revolutionary.
Totally.
Understanding the physical mechanics of how materials interact, it gives you back absolute control over the physical reality of what you were trying to build.
So before we get into the fluid dynamics or like the geometry of the fibers, we really have to navigate what Rodolfo Im defines as the anatomy of visual deception.
Oh, the store shelf illusion.
Exactly. If you walk into any major art supply retailer, the sheer volume of choices is just paralyzing.
It's overwhelming.
And under those fluorescent lights, a mass-produced consumer brush and a premium artisanal brush, well, they look entirely identical to the untrained eye.
Right. They both feature a varnished wooden handle, a shiny metal ferrule, and, a bundle of fibers trapped at the end.
Yeah, the visual shorthand basically tells your brain they are the exact same tool.
But that visual equivalence masks a really staggering mechanical disparity.
But how big of a disparity are we talking about here?
Well, Rodolfo Im highlights a statistic that completely reframes the whole industry. Virtually all of the consumer brushes you see on those shelves are cranked out in mass production facilities.
Right.
Barely 0.1% of the market originates from historical artisanal manufacturing hubs,
Right.
like those found in Germany.
0.1%. That is, that's almost nothing.
It really is. And when we talk about that 0.1%, the distinction isn't just about prestige or having a fancy label on the handle.
Okay, so what is the actual difference then?
The physical difference is entirely concealed inside the metal ferrule. Most people, myself included at one point, assume all brushes are just hair glued into a metal tube.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
But mass manufacturers are optimizing for speed. So they force a bundle of synthetic filaments into the ferrule, and then, to achieve a flat or round shape, a machine simply shears the ends off.
Like a guillotine cut.
Exactly, a guillotine cut. And that mechanical shearing is basically the original fin of a cheap brush.
Why is that so bad, though?
Because a natural hair, or even a properly engineered synthetic filament, tapers to a microscopic, delicate point. When you slice through that bundle with a machine blade, you completely destroy the natural tip.
Oh, wow. So you're just left with blunt, microscopic cylinders.
Yes. And mechanically, that completely compromises the tool's structural integrity. When you press a sheared brush against a canvas, there's no surface tension holding the bundle together.
So they just spread out everywhere.
Yeah, the fibers splay out wildly in every direction, like a broken umbrella giving way in a storm. Your pristine, controlled line is instantly ruined.
Okay, so how do the premium guys do it? The 0.1%.
Premium manufacturing approaches the architecture of the brush from the complete opposite direction. Artisans never cut the working end of the fiber.
Never.
Never. Instead, they meticulously mold and stagger the hairs from deep inside the ferrule. They use these miniature molds to position each individual fiber at a precise depth.
Oh, I see. So the natural tapered tips remain entirely intact.
Exactly. And because those paper tips remain intact, they interact with each other to create perfect surface tension.
They physically support one another.
Right. It transforms what is just a loose collection of hairs into a single cohesive organism that responds predictably to the pressure of your hand.
Man, this is where we return to that silent tragedy of the beginner we talked about at the start.
Yeah, the frustration.
Right, because when you attempt to paint with a sheared, mass-produced brush, you are literally fighting the physics of the tool itself. The fluid dynamics are broken. The tension is non-existent.
It's totally stacked against you.
It really is. It's the equivalent of trying to execute, like, diploma-level calligraphy with a fountain pen that has a shattered nib. It is a physical impossibility.
That's a great analogy.
But the beginner doesn't blame the metal ferrule, right? They blame their own hands. They internalize a mechanical failure as a personal lack of talent, and they just quit.
Which is so sad. But here's the thing. Once you secure a brush with a properly engineered ferrule, the structural physics are solved.
Okay.
But that immaculate assembly is utterly useless if the material striking the canvas is incompatible with your medium. So we have to pivot from structural geometry to the chemistry of the materials.
Right, the actual fibers. Looking at Laura Palacios, the categorization of fibers reveals how entirely different chemical makeups completely dictate the mechanical application of paint.
Let's start with the heavyweights of this studio. Natural bristle, typically boar or pig.
Those are incredibly rigid, rough fighters, right?
Yeah, they're engineered for force. Because natural bristle is so aggressively stiff, it doesn't just hold heavy, high-viscosity mediums, it physically drives them deep into the warp and weft of a heavy canvas weave.
So if you are working with thick impasto techniques, like really spreading the paint on there.
Exactly. The bristle structurally supports the weight of the paint and leaves a distinct topographical record of the brush stroke in the medium.
Okay, so if natural bristles are the heavy machinery, synthetics like extruded nylon or polyester are the precision instruments.
Very much so.
They leave absolutely zero textural footprint, which makes them essential for, hyper-transparent glazes or photorealism.
But there's a massive catch with synthetics.
Yeah, I've definitely ruined my fair share of synthetics by using them on dry, rough canvas. I always assumed I was just buying cheap brands, but Laura Palacios outlines a severe chemical vulnerability here.
You weren't buying a bad brand, you were fighting basic polymer science. Synthetic filaments require constant fluid lubrication.
Okay.
When you drag a dry plastic filament across an abrasive surface like a primed canvas, the friction generates instantaneous heat. And that thermal energy literally melts the microscopic tips of the nylon.
Wait, it literally melts them?
Yes, they curl up and permanently solidify into microscopic hooks.
Oh, wow.
Precisely. And once those tips curl into hooks, the surface tension is permanently destroyed. The brush will perpetually drag and scratch the paint rather than laying it down smoothly.
Well, this brings up a critical point of friction for me, actually. We are living in an era of advanced material engineering and spatial polymers.
Sure.
Yet the historical holy grail of precision brushes remains the natural sable hair. Specifically the Kolinsky sable. It seems super counterintuitive that technology hasn't entirely rendered animal hair obsolete in this specific application.
I agree. It does seem like a glaring anachronism until you examine the microscopic biology of the fibers.
Okay, break that down for me.
No matter how advanced a synthetic filament is, geometrically, it remains a relatively smooth, extruded cylinder. Fluid simply slides down its surface.
But a natural sable hair is different.
Very. Under an electron microscope, you can see a sable hair is covered in thousands of tiny overlapping keratinous scales. It's very similar to the cuticles on human hair or the overlapping tiles on a roof.
Ah, okay. So those microscopic scales fundamentally alter the fluid dynamics.
Exactly. They create immense capillary action. The overlapping structure acts like a microscopic sponge, drawing moisture up into the belly of the brush and holding a massive payload of liquid.
That capillary action is what allows an artist or, even a high-precision manicurist working with acrylics to load the brush a single time and lay down a remarkably long, continuous, unbroken line.
Right. The fluid release is metered and perfectly consistent because the scales hold the liquid in suspension until pressure is applied to the tip.
But despite that biological superiority, GRUPO RAIIM notes a dramatic modern shift in the viability of sable, right?
Yeah, it's becoming a real issue. Natural sable is essentially vanishing from mass commercial availability.
Because of regulations.
Mostly, yes. International animal protection regulations have strictly limited the sourcing, and the sheer economic reality is staggering.
Mm.
A genuine Kolinsky brush can command up to 6 times the price of a premium synthetic equivalent.
6 times. So unless your practice involves highly specific professional level watercolor techniques where that extreme capillary action is an absolute non-negotiable requirement,
Right.
the pragmatic strategy for you is to just invest your capital in high-end synthetics. The polymer engineering has closed the gap enough that the economic premium of sables simply doesn't make sense for most applications.
Definitely. So we have a properly assembled ferrule, and we've calibrated the chemistry of the fiber to the medium.
Awesome.
But applying the perfect synthetic fiber to a delicate curve using a rigid square block will end in disaster. The physics of the fluid must interact with the geometry of the tool.
Rodolfo Human meticulously details how these shapes are not just aesthetic design choices. They are highly specific mechanical problem solvers.
Let's look at the round brush first. It's the oldest and perhaps the most mechanically versatile shape in the arsenal.
And the versatility of the round brush lies in its dynamic range, doesn't it?
Exactly. The footprint it leaves on the canvas is entirely dependent on the biomechanical pressure of your hand.
Right.
A microscopic graze of the tip produces a hairline trajectory, while downward pressure forces the belly of the brush display, generating a wide, teardrop-shaped sweep in a single, continuous motion.
Wow. And then when you need to manage the transition between planes without leaving a sharp edge, you switch shapes. The filbert or cat's tongue becomes essential.
Yeah, the filbert is incredible. It features a flat ferrule construction, but the fibers are staggered to form a soft, oval tip.
Making it the ultimate tool for executing soft gradients.
Right. The lack of sharp corners means you can agitate the paint on the surface, blending the topography of a face or the atmospheric perspective of a cloud without the bristles accidentally carving hard, rigid lines into the wet medium.
Of course, when you actually need that rigid line, the flat brush is the architectural standard. It lays down solid blocks of value.
But the real mechanical advantage of the flat brush is that rotating the tool 90 degrees turns the sharp lateral edge into a razor blade for executing impossibly straight lines.
And that flat architecture directly evolved into the angular brush, which addresses a really specific biomechanical limitation.
Oh, the angular brush is a lifesaver.
The fibers are cut, or rather, staggered on a severe diagonal. If you are trying to cut a sharp edge in a highly restricted corner of a canvas, the angular brush allows you to maintain a neutral, comfortable wrist position.
Yeah, the geometric slant of the tool navigates the corner so your anatomy doesn't have to contort.
I look at these specific geometric shapes the same way a programmer looks at keyboard shortcuts.
That's a perfect way to put it.
They are analog cheat codes that bypass hours of manual labor. Rodolfo M. brings up the avellanato, which takes the oval shape of the filbert and draws it out to a much sharper, pronounced tip.
And the mechanical efficiency of this shape unlocks the double loading technique.
Break that down. How does double loading work?
The mechanics are a perfect example of shape dictating function. You load a dark value onto one lateral side of the avellanato and a bright value onto the opposite side.
Okay.
You anchor the sharp point onto the canvas, apply downward pressure, and dynamically pivot the brush on its central axis.
So in a fraction of a second, that single rotational movement deposits the dark shadow at the base, the bright highlight at the edge, and forces the two values to blend perfectly in the middle.
Yes, you generate a fully rendered three-dimensional petal or leaf instantly. It condenses what would be 20 minutes of meticulous blending into a single flick of the wrist.
That is mind-blowing.
Another incredible mechanical shortcut is the comb brush. Visually, it looks like a manufacturing defect.
Oh, I've seen those. The bristles are separated by deep, intentional gaps. It looks like a ruined brush you'd use to clean an engine block.
It really does. But dragging that gapped structure across the canvas acts as a force multiplier. It deposits 4 or 5 perfectly parallel, equidistant lines simultaneously.
Oh, so you can render complex, overlapping textures like tall grass or animal fur in a fraction of the time it would take with a standard round brush.
Exactly. And this deep dive into geometry explains the core strategic advice from Laura Palacios.
Which is?
Purchasing those massive 30-piece brush sets is a fundamental misallocation of resources. The vast majority of those shapes will never interface with your specific mechanical needs.
So the intelligence is in the curation. You secure 3 premium, flawlessly assembled tools, a round, a flat, and a filbert. And you map those specific geometries to the biomechanics of your own hand.
However, all of this accumulated knowledge, the careful selection of polymer chemistry, the investment in precise geometry, it all becomes entirely irrelevant if you compromise the structural integrity of the tool during its very first cleaning cycle.
Oh, the maintenance ritual. That is the absolute dividing line between the amateur who constantly replaces equipment and the professional who uses the same tool for a decade.
It really is.
GRUPO RAIIM isolates two catastrophic maintenance errors that instantly destroy the mechanics we've just discussed. The first prohibition is violently pulling the wet hairs under running water.
We have to recall the internal architecture of the premium ferrule here. Those fibers are delicately staggered and resting in microscopic molds at the base.
Right, the artisan assembly.
Exactly. When you introduce the hydraulic drag of running water and compound it with the kinetic force of pulling the hairs, you permanently misalign that internal scaffolding.
You completely shatter that perfect surface tension we talked about earlier.
You do. But the second, and arguably more destructive error, is violently driving the brush vertically into the bottom of the water jar to force the pigment out.
Just smashing it down.
Yes, and the mechanical consequences of that action are terminal. You are obviously fracturing the delicate tips of the fibers against the glass, but the invisible damage is much, much worse.
What's happening inside?
The vertical compression operates like a pump. It drives highly diluted liquid pigment deep up into the dark, inaccessible cavity of the metal ferrule.
And once that liquid pigment is trapped inside the metal cylinder, it inevitably dries. As the moisture evaporates, the solid pigment particles expand, don't they?
They do. They act as thousands of microscopic wedges, physically driving the fibers apart from the inside out.
Wow.
The pressure builds until the ferrule structure fails, and your premium, perfectly staggered brush explodes outward, permanently resembling a ruined broom.
It's just irreversible structural damage. You have manufactured a wedge inside the tool itself.
Exactly. But the maintenance protocol isn't just about avoiding destruction. It requires a proactive step dictated by polymer physics.
Okay, what do you have to do?
Before a brush is left to dry, you must manually mold the wet bristles back into their original geometric shape.
Ah, and this relies on the phenomenon of structural memory in polymers, right? The molecular bonds in a synthetic filament are highly responsive to their physical state when transitioning from wet to dry.
Yes. If you leave a damp brush mash against the side of a jar, the fibers will dry with a severe bend.
And the polymer molecules literally reconfigure their structural bonds to accommodate that bend. The material memorizes the distortion.
It operates on the exact same principles as human hair.
Oh, like bedhead.
Exactly. If you go to sleep with soaking wet hair crushed into a pillow, the keratin bonds lock into that chaotic shape as the moisture evaporates. You wake up with hair that physically resists any attempt to comb it straight.
That makes total sense. So when you allow a synthetic brush to dry in a distorted physical state, the tool becomes highly antagonistic. In your next painting session, the fibers will actively fight the biomechanical movement of your hand.
They'll constantly be attempting to snap back to their bent, memorized position.
So just spending 2 seconds to manually align the damp fibers guarantees the tool works with you rather than against you.
It's such a small thing, but it's a game changer.
Well, synthesizing everything we've explored from GRUPO RAIIM today, investing in the perfect brush isn't about purchasing talent. A flawlessly engineered tool isn't going to conceptualize a masterpiece or mix your colors for you.
No, but what a meticulously crafted tool actually does is entirely eliminate mechanical friction. It removes the physical roadblocks between your intent and the canvas.
It allows the pure, unadulterated imagination of the mind to flow seamlessly through your arm and onto the surface, without those frustrating, invisible structural failures that convince brilliant people to quit.
Because when the tool performs flawlessly, it shifts the burden of failure back to the learning process where it belongs, rather than masking a mechanical defect as a personal shortcoming.
And that reality leaves us with a profound, honestly, almost uncomfortable question to dissect long after this deep dive ends.
I love this question.
If a physical object as incredibly simple as a poorly assembled piece of wood and hair can entirely sabotage your effort and quietly, insidiously convince you that you lack inherent talent, what other defective tools are surrounding you in your daily life?
It's a heavy thought.
It really is. Think about the obsolete, sluggish office software you battle every day, or the incredibly inefficient communication architectures your team relies on. Consider the poorly structured cognitive routines and mental frameworks we just blindly accept as normal.
We all have them.
We do. How many of these invisible broken tools are silently, consistently whispering that you are incapable of achieving your largest, most ambitious goals? Perhaps the friction you feel isn't a lack of willpower or a deficit of talent.
Probably not.
Perhaps it is simply time to stop, step back, and finally replace the defective tools you are using to build your daily reality.